What you see at the surface isn't the beginning of the structure. It rises out of a volcanic hill in West Java, at a site known as Gunung Padang, where the terraces cut across the slope in a way that doesn't follow the natural contours, with dark basalt columns stacked and arranged into platforms that feel imposed rather than formed. From above, the layout looks structured, levels stepping upward, stones aligned in ways that suggest repetition, not randomness. The upper layers have been studied long enough to place them broadly within the first millennium CE. On their own, they behave like a site that has been built, adjusted and reused over time. Nothing unusual, until the expectation was tested. The assumption was simple. Beneath the terraces, there would be solid ground. The hill itself would carry the structure. But when surveys moved below the surface, that assumption didn't hold. Ground-penetrating radar began returning signals that didn't resolve cleanly. Instead of a uniform base, there were interruptions, zones where density shifted, where the readings broke pattern, where something beneath the terraces didn't match a single formation. Seismic imaging added to it, mapping variations that suggested the hill wasn't internally consistent. It didn't behave like one structure resting on natural ground. It behaved like layers. Core drilling was used to check it. Samples pulled from different depths didn't show a single continuous material, but changes, sections that appeared compact and ordered, followed by layers that were looser, less defined, then shifts again. The deeper the samples went, the less uniform the hill became. At the surface, the stone is clear. Columnar basalt, cut and placed, repeated in visible patterns. It looks constructed because it is. Below that, the pattern starts to weaken. Shapes become less regular. The arrangement is harder to follow. Instead of a clear build, the structure reads as a sequence, one phase laid over another with no clean boundary between them. It wasn't one construction, it was built again, and again, each phase covering what came before it. If the upper terraces belong roughly to the first millennium CE, then the layers beneath should follow that logic, earlier but still within a recognizable sequence of construction. Instead, some of the readings began to suggest dates far beyond that range, thousands of years earlier, in some interpretations pushed back into the early Holocene, more than 10,000 years ago. For a time, that possibility reframed the entire site. The hill was no longer just modified. It was treated as something far older, something that had been built over repeatedly across vast spans of time. But the deeper the claim went, the more the method came into question. Those dates were not taken from shaped stone or constructed features. They came from organic material embedded in the surrounding soil, material that can indicate how old the layer is, but not whether it was placed there deliberately. Age on its own isn't proof of construction, so the readings remained, but the interpretation fractured. What's left now is a structure that doesn't resolve into a single explanation. The upper layers are clearly human-made, repeatable, ordered and visible. Beneath them, the hill changes character. The deeper you go, the harder it becomes to separate what was arranged from what was already there. At a certain depth, the question stops being about time. It becomes about intent, not when it was built, but whether it was built at all. And in one case, the structure is not in question at all, built precisely and completely, yet showing almost no sign it was ever used. Everything about it suggests permanence. There's almost no sign anyone stayed. It stands on an island in a high-altitude lake in southern Siberia, at a site known as Por-Bajin, a rectangular enclosure rising from the water with walls that hold their shape even from a distance, as if the structure was placed there all at once rather than forming over time. From above, the layout reads clearly. Thick outer walls define a precise boundary, enclosing a grid of inner spaces arranged along a central axis. Courtyards, corridors, divisions that follow a plan instead of adapting to the terrain. The structure doesn't drift or expand. It holds to a design. It looks like a fortress or a palace, something meant to remain. The construction can be dated with unusual precision. Timber from the structure aligns with a radiocarbon event in 775 CE, placing its construction at around 777 CE during the Uyghur Khaganate, a nomadic empire that controlled parts of Central Asia at the time. The layout follows principles seen in Tang Dynasty China: symmetry, axial planning, construction methods that don't originate in the steppe. It was produced by a mobile culture, yet the result resembles a fixed administrative complex, using techniques drawn from a different architectural tradition. The design reflects a structure meant to function, but the evidence of use is limited. Excavations across the site have produced little to suggest sustained occupation. Few artifacts, minimal traces of daily activity. Most notably, there is no clear evidence of heating, no system that would support long-term habitation in a region where winters drop far below freezing. Inside the walls, the ground shows signs of use, but not enough to match the scale of what was built. The rooms don't carry the residue of extended living. The courtyards don't show the wear expected from repeated occupation. The structure holds the shape of permanence. The evidence doesn't follow it. Its placement adds another constraint. The complex sits on an island, separated from the surrounding land, with access that would have been controlled and limited. The location doesn't make movement easier. It restricts it, and that restriction suggests purpose. There are signs that the structure was damaged early. Geological evidence points to seismic activity in the region, possibly during or shortly after construction. Parts of the complex show deformation consistent with earthquake impact, followed by traces of fire. That could explain interruption. It doesn't resolve the absence of occupation. Even with damage, enough of the structure remained intact to leave traces of use, if extended use had been the goal. Some interpretations shift toward ritual function, including a possible connection to Manichaeism during the Uyghur period. That would align with limited habitation, but the structure still doesn't resolve cleanly into that role. It remains too large, too structured, too deliberate for a space that leaves so little behind. The design is precise, the construction is controlled, the layout is complete. What it lacks is duration. There is little evidence anyone stayed long enough to leave a trace that matches the scale of what was built, which places the structure closer to an event than to a settlement, something planned and executed but not meant to continue. And in another case, what remains is not the structure itself, but the knowledge it leaves behind, precise, advanced and isolated, without anything that follows. A skull was found with a section of bone carefully removed. The edges are controlled, shaped rather than broken, following a cut that avoids splintering the surrounding structure. More importantly, the bone shows signs of healing. The individual survived the procedure long enough for the tissue to recover. This places the operation somewhere between 3200 and 1800 BCE within a settlement now known as Shahr-e Sukhteh in southeastern Iran. The site spreads across a dry, open landscape, its remains marked by low mud brick structures and wide excavation zones that reveal a city organized in sections rather than built outward without plan. The skull isn't an isolated case. In another burial, a woman was found with an artificial eye placed into the socket. The object was constructed from a combination of materials including bitumen, with fine gold wire used to secure it in position. The surface was shaped to resemble an eye, not to restore vision, but to reproduce its appearance. Both cases point to the same pattern: deliberate intervention, control over materials, precision applied to the body itself, and they exist within the same site. Across the settlement, the layout separates activity into distinct areas. Residential spaces, zones of production and burial grounds appear in defined sections, repeated across the site in a way that suggests organization rather than accumulation. Pottery, textiles and metalwork are not scattered. They are concentrated, indicating that different functions were carried out in different parts of the city. The system holds. Materials found within these areas extend beyond the site itself. Stone, metals and crafted goods trace outward toward the Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, and regions further east, indicating that the settlement was part of a broader network rather than an isolated point. The knowledge wasn't confined, it moved. The procedures worked. The individual with the cranial operation survived beyond the initial intervention. The artificial eye was not improvised, it was shaped, fitted and worn. These are not early attempts without outcome. They are results that required planning and execution, and yet they remain contained. There is no clear sequence that carries the same level of precision forward. No visible chain that develops these techniques beyond their immediate context. The methods appear fully formed, but they do not extend in a way that would suggest continuity across time or region. The settlement itself does not end with a sudden break. There is no single point of collapse that would account for the loss of knowledge. Instead, occupation thins out gradually, leaving behind layers of use without a defined event that would interrupt the transmission of what was already known. The layout remains. The evidence of what was done there remains. What does not remain is a system that continues it, and that shifts the focus away from how advanced the site was and towards something narrower. The techniques are present, working, and connected to a wider world, but they do not persist beyond it. And what follows is not a continuation of that system, but a settlement brought to an end while it still stands. The remains are burned, not scattered, not collapsed into fragments, but held in place. The outline of the settlement still visible as a complete circle, its form preserved even after the fire. From above, the layout is still readable. Concentric rings define the plan, with radial divisions connecting outer walls to a central open space. The design does not break where the damage occurred. The pattern holds. What burned did not erase it. The settlement, known as Arkaim, was built in the southern Ural region around the 17th to 16th century BCE, part of what is now identified as the Sintashta culture. It does not grow outward in irregular phases. It appears planned from the start, constructed as a single design rather than assembled over time. The outer wall is integrated with the housing itself. Dwellings form part of the defensive structure, arranged in a continuous ring, with entrances oriented toward internal streets rather than the exterior. Movement follows defined paths. Space is controlled. Inside, the layout repeats. Sections mirror each other. The plan is applied, not adjusted. Drainage systems run beneath the settlement. Construction follows consistent methods across the site. Nothing suggests improvisation. The design is complete. The culture associated with it shows no lack of capability. Metallurgical work, early chariot development, and coordinated construction all point to a level of organization that supports a structure intended for sustained use. But the evidence of its end does not match collapse. Across the site, the burn layer is consistent. Houses burned where they stood, without signs of having been dismantled or stripped beforehand. The damage does not concentrate at entry points or along defensive lines. The layout remains legible after the fire. There is no clear indication of siege, no pattern of destruction that breaks the settlement from the outside. The structure does not fail unevenly. It ends evenly, and it does not continue. The site was not rebuilt. The location was not reused in the same way. Other settlements associated with the same culture follow similar planning principles, but they do not all end in identical conditions, and the pattern seen here does not extend forward at this location. The ending does not interrupt the design, it follows it. The same level of control that defines the construction appears again in the way it concludes, leaving behind a settlement that is complete in form but not in duration. And that narrows the focus, not what destroyed it. But why a structure built to function as a system reaches a point where its order is preserved, while its continuity is removed. The layout remains intact. The pattern is still visible in full. What changes is not the structure itself, but whether it was ever meant to extend beyond this moment. But not every structure ends this way or fades over time. Some were never built to be lived in at all. A human face emerges from the stone. It is not placed on a surface or carved as an object meant to be moved. It is fixed into the structure itself, its features shaped directly from the surrounding rock, as if the figure was meant to exist as part of the setting rather than within it. The face does not stand alone. Across the site, pillars rise from the ground, many of them carrying similar forms. Human heads, partial figures, surfaces that hold deliberate marks rather than natural erosion. The stone is not simply arranged. It is worked, shaped, and repeated. Around these elements, the layout forms defined areas. Circular enclosures, pits cut into the bedrock, and carved benches that follow the edges of these spaces create an environment that does not expand outward, like a settlement adapting to terrain. It holds to a pattern. These structures are built to be entered. They are also built to be used. They do not resemble places meant for living. There are no clear houses, no hearths arranged for regular use, no consistent traces of cooking or long-term habitation. The features that would support daily life are absent, even though the effort invested in shaping the site suggests sustained activity. This absence is not confined to a single location. Karahantepe, dating back to around 10,000 BCE, is part of a wider landscape across southeastern Anatolia, where similar enclosures, pillars, and carved forms appear at multiple sites. The pattern repeats with variation, but the underlying approach remains consistent. These are not isolated constructions. The idea extends across the region. Within these environments, human presence is emphasized through representation. Faces appear in the stone, figures are integrated into the architecture itself, fixed in place, emerging from surfaces that define the interior. Compared to nearby sites such as Göbekli Tepe, where animal imagery dominates, the focus here shifts more clearly toward human forms. The presence is deliberate, the habitation is not. Movement is implied through the arrangement, paths, enclosed areas, points of interaction. But nothing indicates that these environments supported continuous living. They are entered, used, and left without accumulating the traces that define settlements. The system exists. It functions, but it does not extend into habitation, and that narrows the focus. Not what these places were, but why structures built with precision, repeated across a wider region, and centered on human presence are designed for activity, while excluding the conditions required for living. The layout holds its pattern. The forms remain fixed within it. What changes is not how these places were used, but what they were never meant to become. Some environments concentrate movement and control within defined limits, and in one case, that control is reduced to a single function, holding what cannot leave. The chamber, known as the Mamertine prison in ancient Rome, lies below ground. Stone walls enclose it on all sides, forming a space that does not open outward. There is no clear lateral access into the lower level, no corridor that allows movement through. The structure holds inward, contained beneath the surface rather than connected to it. Access comes from above. An opening in the ceiling defines the only direct entry point. What enters does not pass through a doorway. It is lowered. The movement is controlled at the point of descent, and once it reaches the lower chamber, there is no equivalent path back. The chamber forms part of a larger arrangement, dating back to around the 7th to 6th century BCE, with an upper level positioned directly over it. The separation is deliberate. Movement between the two is not continuous but regulated, with the lower space dependent on what is allowed to pass into it. The design is limited. It was not built to support extended use. There are no arrangements that would suggest habitation, no features that allow for sustained living. The structure does not expand or adapt. It holds what is placed inside it and nothing more. Its function appears in what passes through it. Those brought into the lower chamber, particularly during the Roman Republic, were not meant to remain there over time. The design does not support duration. It is used at the point where movement narrows, when whatever process surrounds the individual has already reduced to a single outcome. The form may not have begun with that purpose. Its structure suggests an earlier use, possibly connected to water or storage. But the function imposed on it later does not depend on that origin. It depends on control. Above, in the center of Roman life, movement continues without interruption. Decisions are made, authority shifts, and activity persists at ground level. Below, none of that carries through. Position does not alter what happens once the descent is complete. The conditions reinforce it. Limited light, confined space, and the absence of any route outward do not allow for extension or delay. The chamber does not direct what happens within it, but it does not interrupt it either. There is no variation in outcome. The structure does not divide, redirect, or release. It reduces what enters it to a single end, regardless of what existed before, and that narrows the focus. Not who is brought into the chamber, but why every path that leads downward converges on the same result. Nothing inside this chamber moves freely, and every descent leads to the same conclusion. The form remains unchanged, but its function reduces everything that enters it to a single outcome, leaving no possibility of return. Elsewhere, control takes a different form. It does not wait at the point where movement ends, but acts at the boundary itself. The wall surrounding the city of Pingyao forms a continuous boundary. It does not break or fade as it moves across the landscape. Stone and brick form a continuous line, rising to a height that allows movement along its top, with towers positioned at regular intervals. From above, the layout reads as a complete boundary, enclosing everything within it. The full layout is visible at once. Gates interrupt the wall at controlled points, each one layered to slow movement, to narrow entry, to regulate what passes through. Paths are directed, not open. Space is divided between inside and outside with no ambiguity in between. The structure does not adapt to pressure, it is built for it. The current walls take their form in the 14th century, during the Ming dynasty, when earlier fortifications were rebuilt into a continuous defensive line. The result is not an inherited outline, but a deliberate construction shaped to meet a specific kind of threat. Every part of it reflects that intention. The height allows visibility beyond the boundary. The width supports movement along the top. The towers create overlapping lines of observation and defense. The gates form points of resistance rather than simple passage. Nothing in the design suggests uncertainty, and yet the moment it was built for does not define it. The regions surrounding the city did not remain without conflict. Pressure existed, movement occurred, and the conditions that shaped the construction were real. But there is no single event, no recorded siege on the scale the system anticipates, that tests the wall in the way it was designed to be tested. The structure remains intact. Its form is preserved not because it failed, but because it was never pushed to the point where failure would become visible, and that changes how it is read. The wall does not show where it held. It shows what it was prepared to resist. Inside the boundary, movement continues under protection. Outside, the line remains fixed, separating what is allowed from what is not. The system does not respond to an event. It exists in anticipation of one, and that leaves a different kind of absence. Not the absence of structure or use or knowledge, but the absence of the moment everything was built to meet. The wall still defines the edge. The towers still mark the line. The system remains complete. What it was built for never fully arrives. Across different places and different times, the pattern repeats. Structures are built with precision, shaped for a purpose and carried to completion. But what they were meant to meet is often missing, interrupted, or never fully arrives. The design remains. The intention is visible, the outcome doesn't follow. If one of these stories stayed with you, let it travel. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't. The search continues here on Riddle Me This Mysteries.